At my age, I haven't lost my ability to do the things. I lost the ability to recover from doing them, and nobody warned me that that was going to be a separate skill that I'd have to learn. My brain has obviously not reviewed its recent performance data, and it remains wildly overconfident, which is how I keep agreeing to lives that I don't actually have the stamina to live. I just started noticing that by the time I got to the end of the day, there was nothing left in the old tank, and I couldn't figure out where all my energies went. I'm operational, but I'm not okay, which is a distinction that no one respects. If you're upright and wearing pants, the system considers you a success story. I kept thinking that I was being lazy or dramatic or somehow worse at life than I used to be. From the outside, I still looked fine. I was doing the things. I was handling the things. I was technically functioning. Inside, though, everything felt louder, heavier, and shorter. My tolerance shrank. My recovery time stretched. Things that used to feel easy started feeling like big-ass efforts, like answering the phone or wearing a bra or showering. That's when I realized that the problem was not motivation, it was capacity. I'd been blaming my character for what was actually math. Hey, I'm Sheila. I'm not a coach, I'm not a guru, I'm just a woman of a certain vintage who's already made the mistakes that you're still trying to avoid. I figured out some of it, and I don't mind sharing my notes. Some of them were written in eyeliner on napkins, but they're still valid. I've learned that limits don't arrive with a warning label, and my capacity changed before my identity caught up. And that gap in between them made me treat my reality like it was a personal failure. Because nothing says totally stable adult like ugly crying in the parking lot because the lotion aisle was too loud. That's a true story. I didn't stop functioning. I didn't lose skills. I didn't suddenly forget how to be competent at my own life. I just started hitting a wall sooner, and that wall moved closer every year, like it had some personal vendetta against me. The wall didn't explain itself. It didn't apologize. It just showed up like it had access to my own personal calendar. The wall was calm. I was the one that was spiraling. I wasn't falling apart or melting down. I was just hitting empty earlier in the day and staring at it like, well, this is inconvenient because I still have lots of hours left to get through. Cool. Just a casual existential crisis at 3 p.m. I could still do the things. I could still show up. I could still get through conversations, errands, obligations, and whatever else was on the list. I just couldn't stack them the way that I used to without my body quietly pulling the emergency brake later. No lights, no sirens, just a little fuck this from my adrenal system. Noise got expensive. Decisions felt heavier than they needed to be. Interruptions started irritating me in a way that felt out of proportion. That really messed with me because nothing was obviously wrong. I was still capable, still competent, still the same person on paper. So when things started feeling harder, my first assumption was that I was the problem. I mean, who else could it be? Surely not late stage capitalism or this cursed meat suit I'm in. I probably had an attitude problem. Instead of adjusting, I doubled down. I kept saying yes to the same volume, the same pace, the same expectations, and then privately resenting myself when my body paid the price later. I told myself that I should be able to handle this because I always had. I compared myself to an older version of me like she was still available, just temporarily offline, and I kept waiting for her to come back. I adjusted nothing and I blamed myself for everything. That worked exactly as well as you would expect. I kept thinking that I needed to try harder because that belief had been rewarded my entire life. What I didn't understand yet was that effort does not fix a capacity problem. Effort just burns through what little margin you have left. I was not failing loudly enough to earn compassion, including my own. That's when I understood that this was not about motivation, discipline, or resilience. This was about capacity shrinking quietly while my identity stayed frozen in an older version of myself that could carry more. That bitch was a tank and I miss her every day. Here is the lie that I believed, and I believed it for a long time because it had always paid me back. I believed that if I could still do something, then I should keep doing it. I didn't think of that as a belief at the time. I thought of that as my character, right? I thought it meant I was strong, dependable, and not the kind of person who suddenly couldn't handle her own life. Oh no! I had built an identity around being the one who could handle more. more noise, more responsibility, more emotional weight, more plates in the air while smiling politely and pretending I was not counting them the whole time. That identity got rewarded, which is how I hardened it into a rule. So when my capacity started shrinking, it didn't register as information, it registered as shame. Letting go of old output felt like letting go of proof that I mattered. It felt like erasing evidence. It felt like telling the world and myself that I was no longer who I said I was, which is terrifying when that version of you has paid the bills and kept you safe. Because if you're the person who can handle more and suddenly you can't, then what exactly are you now? That's the question that I kept avoiding. The messed up part is that relief showed up at the same time as grief, which made everything even more confusing. Every time I canceled something, simplified something, or chose quiet instead of pushing through, my body relaxed in a way that made the truth impossible to ignore. At that same time, my brain started mourning the woman who could do more without consequences. Basically, my body was thrilled, and my ego filed a missing persons report. I missed her stamina. I missed her tolerance. I missed how proud I was of her endurance, even though that endurance had been draining me for years, like a slow leak that I just kept pretending wasn't there. So I tried to bargain with reality. I told myself that I didn't need to give anything up. I just needed to do it better. I could still be everything if I scheduled it carefully, rationed my energy like it was wartime, and treated recovery as optional instead of necessary. That was adorable, wasn't it? Delusional, but adorable. What I was actually doing was treating it like a temporary inconvenience instead of a signal that something fundamental had changed. I kept trying to earn my way back into a capacity that was no longer available, and every attempt made the grief louder. Because grief doesn't always show up as sadness, y'all. Sometimes it shows up as confusion. Sometimes it shows up as irritation. Sometimes it shows up as that constant sense that you're doing life wrong, even when you're technically doing everything right. The hardest thing to accept was that nothing had gone wrong. Nothing had failed. Nothing needed fixing in the way that I kept trying to fix it. There was no version of this where I just pushed harder and got my old capacity back as a reward. Because I wasn't broken. I was changed. And the version of me who could do more wasn't coming back no matter how convincingly I argued with reality. We live inside a culture that treats humans like expandable storage units. The expectation is that you should keep absorbing more life, more stress, more noise, and more responsibility without losing range, speed, or emotional stability. If you can't do that, the assumption is something's wrong with you, not the system that keeps piling it on. Endless capacity assumptions are the villain here. They wear little clip-on ties and think exhaustion is a branding issue. If you're still upright, you're supposed to keep going. If you're still capable, you're supposed to stay capable at the same scale forever. There's no room for the idea that a human nervous system might hit a limit and say, yeah, we're not doing that anymore, especially in midlife. By then, you've got history, you've got wear, you've got years of pushing through things that you didn't have language for at the time. But the expectations, they never adjust. They just sit there frozen, like you're still the same person with the same bandwidth and the same tolerance for chaos. So when your capacity shifts, it doesn't get named as reality. It gets framed as weakness or burnout or poor coping skills or a mindset issue that you're apparently supposed to fix quietly so that you don't make anyone else uncomfortable. That's why this feels so isolating. You're quietly breaking the rules while everyone else insists the rules are just fine. Turns out the problem wasn't me. It was the full-time job of pretending to be me. You can't point to a single event and say this is when it happened. You just know that your tolerance for noise, chaos, and emotional output has shifted, and pretending otherwise makes everything worse. And then you start blaming yourself for noticing. You tell yourself that other people are handling this better. You tell yourself that you should be more resilient. You tell yourself that you're being dramatic or sensitive or lazy because that explanation feels safer than admitting the rules were never designed for humans to age, adapt, and downshift without punishment. Once I saw that, it stopped feeling like a personal defect. My body wasn't betraying me. It was enforcing limits in a system that pretends limits don't exist. It was doing the thing that bodies do when they've carried too much for too long and nobody bothered to renegotiate the terms. That realization didn't cure anything, but it did take the moral judgment out of it. And that changed everything. My capacity didn't shrink because I failed or gave up or stopped trying hard enough. It shrank because I kept living like my limits were optional and my body finally disagreed. The real damage was pretending nothing had changed and then punishing myself every time I couldn't keep up with an old version of me that doesn't exist anymore. If your life feels heavier lately and you can't explain why, it might not be because you're weak or unmotivated or doing adulthood wrong. It might just be that your capacity shifted quietly and without your permission, and nobody bothered to tell you that that was allowed, that that's okay. So now you know, and you don't have to keep gaslighting yourself just to survive your own life.